When the Henderson family gathered for the reading of the will, they expected millions. They certainly didn't expect the outcast niece to claim a rotting, rat-infested barn instead of the sprawling mansion. They laughed in her face, but that laughter died the second a crowbar exposed what was buried inside. The mahogany-paneled office of Harrison Wallace, attorney at law, smelled distinctly of lemon polish and impending greed. Rain lashed against the towering windows overlooking downtown Chicago, but inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly dry. Penny Henderson sat in the furthest corner of the room, her damp trench coat pulled tightly around her shoulders. She was 26, exhausted, and completely out of place among the designer suits and diamond-studded watches that adorned her remaining relatives. Across the massive oak conference table sat her uncle, Bradley Henderson, a man whose face was perpetually locked in a smug, self-satisfied sneer. Next to him was his daughter, Abigail, furiously tapping on her latest iPhone, completely indifferent to the fact that they were there to finalize the legacy of her grandfather. Nathaniel Henderson had been a titan of industry, a man who built a shipping empire from the ground up. But to Penny, he was just Grandpa Nate, the only person in the family who had ever looked at her with genuine affection after her father, William, died in a tragic accident 15 years ago. Bradley had always viewed William as the weak link of the family, a sentiment he happily transferred to Penny the moment her father was buried. "If we could please bring this charade to a close, Harrison," Bradley barked, checking his gold Rolex for the third time. "I have a board meeting at 2 o'clock, and I need to begin the liquidation process of the secondary estate assets by this weekend. Let's just read the numbers." Mr. Wallace peered over his half-moon spectacles, his expression stern. "Nathaniel's will is not a simple ledger of accounts, Bradley. Your father was a meticulous man, and his final testaments are unconventional." Bradley rolled his eyes. He was losing his mind in those last few months. "Just read the document." Wallace broke the heavy wax seal on the beige envelope. The room fell dead silent. Even Abigail stopped texting. "I, Nathaniel Harrison Henderson, being of sound mind, do hereby dictate the division of my earthly possessions," Wallace began, his deep voice filling the room. He read through the standard legal jargon, the minor bequests to the household staff, and the charitable donations. Bradley tapped his fingers impatiently on the table. "To the bulk of my estate, including the primary Henderson Manor, the surrounding 300 acres in the Hudson Valley, and the entirety of the Henderson shipping stock portfolios, I place a unique stipulation." Wallace paused, taking a slow sip of water. He looked directly at Penny. "To my granddaughter, Penelope, I grant the right of first selection. She is to choose exactly one physical structure on the Henderson estate, along with the immediate 1 acre of land upon which it sits. Whatever she selects shall be deeded to her, free and clear of any encumbrance. To my son, Bradley, I leave the remainder of the estate in its entirety, minus Penelope's selection." The silence that followed was so profound that Penny could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then the explosion came. "Absolutely not!" Bradley slammed his hands on the table, half rising from his leather chair. "This is a joke, a clerical error. You're telling me this barista gets to walk onto the estate and just take the manor? She can take the main house and leave me with the guest cabins. I'll contest it. I'll tie this up in probate court for decades." "You cannot contest it, Bradley," Wallace said calmly. "The wording is ironclad. Nathaniel had 3 independent psychiatrists evaluate him the day he signed this. If Penelope chooses the main manor, it is hers. Abigail scoffed loudly. She doesn't even know how to run a house that big. She lives in a studio apartment that smells like cat food. This is ridiculous. Penny sat frozen. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The manor was worth at least $12 million. The stock portfolio was worth tens of millions more. But the house, the ancestral home, with its massive columns and sweeping staircases, was the crown jewel. Bradley was staring at her, his face purple with rage, silently daring her to speak. But Penny's mind wasn't on the money. It was flashing back to a muggy afternoon 20 years ago. She was 6 years old, holding her grandfather's calloused hand as they walked the perimeter of the sprawling property. They had stopped at the very edge of the estate, where the manicured lawns gave way to overgrown weeds and twisted oak trees. Standing there was the North Field barn. It was a massive, sagging, red-painted structure built in the late 1800s, long abandoned by the family. "Look at it, Penny," Nathaniel had said that day, his voice thick with a strange emotion she hadn't understood at the time. Bradley thinks the power of this family is up in that big brick house. But he's a fool. The real foundation of the Hendersons isn't in the mansion. It's where the dirt is. It's where the work was done. Remember that when I'm gone. The truth is always at the foundation. Penelope. Mr. Wallace's voice pulled her back to the present. Do you need time to consult with a realtor? You have 30 days to make your selection. Penny looked at her uncle. Bradley was sweating now, the reality of the situation sinking in. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. Listen to me, Penny, he hissed, his voice dropping to a condescending purr. You don't want the manor. The property taxes alone would bankrupt you in 6 months. I'll write you a check right now for $500,000. You waive your right to selection, and you walk away clean. $500,000. That's more money than your useless father made in his entire life. Penny felt a cold spark of anger ignite in her chest. She looked at the checkbook, then up at Bradley's desperate, greedy eyes. Keep your money, Uncle Bradley, Penny said softly. She turned to the lawyer. I don't need 30 days, Mr. Wallace. I know exactly what I want. Penny, be reasonable, Bradley started. I choose the North Field barn, she stated clearly. The barn and the 1 acre it sits on at the eastern edge of the property. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Bradley let out a bark of incredulous laughter. The barn? He gasped, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. The rotting, termite-infested pile of wood that's practically collapsing into the mud. That barn? Yes, Penny said, her voice steady. Abigail snickered, leaning over to whisper something cruel to her father. Bradley's demeanor instantly shifted from panic to sheer, arrogant triumph. He smoothed his tie, a wide, predatory grin spreading across his face. Well, Harrison, Bradley gloated, you heard the girl. Draw up the papers. She gets the pile of firewood, and I get the manor, the stocks, and the remaining 299 acres. A fool and her inheritance are easily parted. Penelope, are you certain? Mr. Wallace asked, looking deeply concerned. The structural integrity of that barn is severely compromised. Its market value is essentially 0. I'm sure, Penny replied, standing up. Where do I sign? 3 weeks later, the Hudson Valley was bathed in the crisp, golden light of early autumn. Penny parked her beat-up Honda Civic in the tall, overgrown grass near the North Field barn. In the distance, nearly a mile away, she could see the grand roof line of the Henderson Manor. Bradley had already begun renovations, throwing lavish weekend parties to celebrate his newfound undisputed kingship of the family empire. Penny stepped out of her car, the wind whipping her hair across her face, and looked up at her inheritance. It was, objectively, a disaster. The red paint had peeled away decades ago, leaving the massive wooden planks a ghostly, weathered grey. The roof dipped ominously in the center, missing dozens of shingles, and the heavy double doors at the front were chained shut with a rusted padlock. It looked like a strong gust of wind could bring the entire structure crashing down into the dirt. But Penny felt a strange sense of peace. She grabbed a pair of heavy leather work gloves, a pry bar, and a set of bolt cutters from her trunk. She marched up to the front doors and snapped the rusted padlock. It fell to the ground with a dull thud. With a heavy groan, she pulled the massive sliding doors apart. The interior was cavernous, smelling heavily of ancient dust, dried horse manure, and rotting timber. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the holes in the roof, illuminating millions of dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. Old farming equipment, a rusted tractor, piles of dry rotted harnesses, and stacks of wooden pallets littered the dirt floor. Penny spent the first 3 days just clearing out the garbage. She worked from dawn until dusk, hauling debris into a rented dumpster, her muscles aching and her hands blistered. She didn't know what she was looking for. Perhaps she had made a terrible mistake. Perhaps Nathaniel had just been a senile old man rambling about foundations, and she had thrown away her one chance at financial security purely out of spite for her uncle. By the afternoon of the 4th day, she was exhausted. She sat on an overturned bucket, drinking from a thermos of tepid water, staring blankly at the back wall of the barn. Something was wrong. Penny frowned, setting the thermos down. She stood up and walked toward the rear of the structure, where a series of old horse stalls lined the wall. She looked up at the ceiling, tracing the massive wooden beams that spanned the width of the barn. Before coming here, Penny had pulled the original architectural blueprints from the county records office to see if the structure could even be salvaged. The blueprints stated the barn was 80 feet long and 60 feet wide. She walked outside, taking a long measuring tape from her toolbox. She pinned it to the fronter and walked all the way to the back. 80 feet exactly. She walked back inside. She pinned the tape to the front interior wall and walked down the center aisle, past the tractor, past the stalls, until she hit the solid wooden planks of the back wall. She looked at the tape measure. 65 feet. Penny's heart skipped a beat. She remeasured it. 65 feet. She dropped the tape measure and stared at the back wall. From the outside, the barn was 80 feet long. From the inside, it was only 65. There was a 15-foot gap of space completely unaccounted for at the rear of the barn. Penny rushed to the horse stalls. The wood here looked identical to the rest of the barn, weathered, stained, and ancient. But as she pressed her hand against the vertical planks, she noticed something. The nails holding these boards in place weren't the square, hand-forged iron spikes as in the rest of the 19th century structure. They were modern, galvanized steel, cleverly rusted with acid to look old. "The foundation," Penny whispered to the empty barn. "It's where the work was done." She grabbed her heavy crowbar and a sledgehammer. She swung the sledgehammer with everything she had, smashing it into the center of the wooden planks. The wood splintered with a deafening crack. She swung again and again, adrenaline flooding her veins, wiping away the exhaustion of the past 4 days. A large chunk of the wooden paneling caved inward, revealing a pitch-black void behind it. Penny dropped the sledgehammer and picked up her flashlight, clicking the beam on. She aimed it through the jagged hole. What she saw made her gasp out loud. Behind the false wooden wall was not empty space. It was a solid wall of poured, reinforced concrete. And right in the center of it, entirely obscured from the outside world, was a heavy, industrial-grade steel vault door, the kind you would find in a high-security bank. Her hands trembling, Penny used the crowbar to rip away the remaining wooden facade until the entire steel door was exposed. It was pristine, gleaming dully in the flashlight beam. In the center of the door was a digital, biometric keypad and a traditional mechanical combination dial. There was no way she could break through this. It was impenetrable. She stared at the mechanical dial. What would Grandpa Nate use? She thought frantically. His birthday? No, too obvious. The day he started the company. She tried 1952. Nothing. She stepped back, frustrated. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the memory of the old man. Think, Penny. Think. He had brought her here. He had told her the foundation was here. What else had he said? The real foundation is where the truth is. Suddenly, she remembered the day her father, William, had died. It was October 14th, 2011. Bradley had relentlessly mocked William for a failed business venture that very morning. William had driven off in a rage and crashed his car into a ravine. Nathaniel had been devastated, but Bradley had practically cheered, quietly absorbing William's share of the company's stock over the next year. Penny stepped up to the dial. Her hands were slick with sweat. She spun it right to 10, left to 14, right to 11. Clack! A heavy metallic thud echoed from deep within the door. The digital keypad suddenly blinked to life, flashing a single word in neon green: unlocked. Penny grabbed the heavy steel handle and pulled. With a hiss of depressurized air, the massive door swung open on perfectly oiled hinges. She stepped into the hidden 15-foot room. It was completely climate-controlled. The air dry and cool. She found a light switch on the wall and flipped it. Rows of bright LED fluorescent lights flickered on, illuminating the secret heart of the Henderson family empire. Penny clamped a hand over her mouth. The room was lined from floor to ceiling with heavy metal shelving. On the left side of the room, stacked with meticulous care, were hundreds of heavy canvas bags and wooden crates. Penny walked over to the nearest crate and pried the loose lid open. It was packed with rows of solid gold bullion, stamped with the insignias of Swiss banks. There had to be millions of dollars in gold alone. But that wasn't what made Penny's blood run cold. On the right side of the room was a large mahogany desk, completely out of place in the concrete bunker. Sitting perfectly centered on the desk was a sleek, modern laptop, and beside it, a massive stack of black leather-bound ledgers. Resting on top of the laptop was a white envelope with her name handwritten on it in Nathaniel's familiar, jagged scrawl. Penelope. She tore the envelope open. The letter inside was dated only 2 weeks before his death. My dearest Penny, if you are reading this, it means you were smart enough to ignore the shiny bait of the manor and look for the truth. You are the only true Henderson left. Bradley thinks he has inherited a kingdom. He is wrong. He has inherited a graveyard. For the last 10 years, I have been systematically dismantling the public assets of the Henderson estate. The manor, the stocks, the shipping lines, they are all a facade. I leveraged them, mortgaged them to the hilt, and siphoned the liquid cash into untraceable assets hidden in this room. Bradley has inherited over $400 million in hidden debt that is set to detonate the moment the probate period ends. He killed your father, Penny. Not with his own hands, but he cut the brake lines on William's car that October morning. I found the proof too late. I couldn't bear to destroy my own son publicly, so I chose a different punishment. I chose absolute ruin. Look in the red ledger on the desk. You hold the detonator now. Penny slowly lowered the letter. She looked at the red ledger, then at the fortune surrounding her. The old barn hadn't just been a test. It was an armory, and Penny was about to go to war. The red ledger felt heavy in her hands, bound in cracked, aged leather, and filled with Nathaniel's precise, looping handwriting. Penny opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the meticulously organized columns. It was nothing short of a masterclass in financial sabotage. Nathaniel had spent the last decade taking out massive, high-interest collateralized loans against the Henderson shipping fleet. He had secretly remortgaged the sprawling Hudson Valley estate 3 separate times through obscure dummy corporations based in the Cayman Islands. Every single dime of liquid capital the family possessed had been aggressively converted into the untraceable gold bullion surrounding her, or funneled into offshore accounts whose access codes were meticulously detailed on the encrypted laptop. The trap was set with a 30-day timer. The loans were explicitly designed to default exactly 1 week after the probate period officially closed, transferring the entirety of the crushing, insurmountable debt squarely onto the shoulders of the primary beneficiary, Bradley. Penny spent the next 3 days living inside the concrete bunker, completely hidden from the outside world. She ordered a discreet satellite internet connection and hauled in a portable generator, carefully masking the noise with the rusted shell of the old tractor outside. She dug obsessively through the laptop's encrypted files. There were chilling audio recordings, hundreds of encrypted emails, and most damning of all, a locked digital folder labeled simply William. With trembling fingers and a racing heart, she cracked the folder using the same date combination that opened the vault. It contained a scanned invoice from a shady auto mechanic based out of Newark, New Jersey, dated exactly 3 days before her father's fatal crash. The invoice was for custom brake line modifications, billed directly to a shell company that Bradley personally controlled. There were also grainy surveillance photographs of Bradley meeting the mechanic in a desolate roadside diner, taken by a private investigator Nathaniel had hired far too late. The evidence was absolute and horrifying. Bradley hadn't just bullied her father. He had orchestrated his murder in cold blood to consolidate his ruthless grip on the family empire. Nathaniel had been gathering the proof, building an airtight case, but his rapidly failing health had forced him to pivot to this final, devastating snare. He couldn't put his son in prison before he died, so he built a prison of debt and ruin for him instead. While Penny worked tirelessly in the shadows, unearthing the darkest secrets of her bloodline, he celebrated fiercely in the light. He threw a lavish, ostentatious, masquerade-themed gala at the manor to officially announce his ascension as CEO of Henderson Shipping. The local news stations eagerly covered the extravagant event, flashing endless images of Abigail dripping in expensive diamonds, laughing wildly under the grand crystal chandeliers. Bradley gave a pompous, arrogant speech on the front steps of the mansion, holding a glass of vintage champagne, loudly boasting about the invincible future of his empire. Penny watched the live drone footage of the party from her laptop in the dark, dusty barn, a cold, humorless smile playing on her lips. She checked the calendar pinned to the concrete wall. The probate period had officially closed at midnight. Bradley was now the undisputed legal owner of the estate, the shipping lines, and all their associated liabilities. The dominoes were finally ready to fall. At exactly 9:07 a.m. the following Monday, Penny made a single decisive phone call. She didn't call the police. Not yet. She called a contact explicitly listed on the first page of the Red Ledger. Jonathan Crawford, the ruthless lead collections officer for a predatory private equity firm in Manhattan. "Mr. Crawford," Penny said, her voice chillingly steady. "My name is Penelope Henderson. I believe you are actively looking to collect on the heavily collateralized debts of Henderson Shipping. The probate has officially cleared this morning. The primary beneficiary now assumes all liabilities. I highly suggest you move your asset recovery teams quickly before the other international creditors realize the estate is completely insolvent." The silence on the other end of the line was electric, thick with the realization of a massive financial bloodbath. Then Crawford spoke, his voice dripping with predatory eagerness. "Thank you for the anonymous tip, Ms. Henderson. We will begin immediate asset seizure." Penny hung up the phone and leaned back in her grandfather's chair. The foundation had been laid. Now it was time to watch the house burn down. The total collapse of Bradley Henderson was neither slow nor graceful. It was a spectacular, catastrophic implosion that sent shockwaves through the financial world. It began abruptly during a high-stakes emergency board meeting on a Tuesday afternoon. Bradley was in the middle of a screaming tirade about sinking profit margins when the heavy oak doors of the boardroom were violently thrown open. A stern-faced team of federal marshals, accompanied by aggressive forensic accountants, marched into the room. They slammed a thick stack of legal injunctions onto the mahogany table. Every single bank account associated with Bradley's name, the shipping company, and the broader estate had been frozen simultaneously. "What is the absolute meaning of this outrage?" Bradley roared, his face flushing a dangerous, apoplectic crimson. "I am a billionaire. You can't just walk in here and interrupt my meeting." "Actually, sir, you are currently in default of over $450 million. A stoic, broad-shouldered marshal replied coldly. "The Henderson Manor is being actively repossessed by the banks as we speak. You have exactly until 5 o'clock this evening to vacate the premises before you are escorted out in handcuffs." Panic, raw, and completely unfiltered, seized Bradley's chest. He sprinted to the parking garage and drove back to the Hudson Valley estate like a madman, recklessly blowing past red lights and swerving through traffic. When he finally arrived, his worst nightmare had manifested. A dozen heavy moving trucks were aggressively parked across the manicured lawns. Repo men were systematically carrying out priceless antique furniture, original oil paintings, and Abigail's massive collection of designer luggage. Abigail herself was standing barefoot on the gravel driveway, screaming hysterically into her phone as a towing company hooked up her brand-new Porsche. Bradley's mind raced frantically. He had absolutely nothing. The stocks were entirely worthless, heavily leveraged against phantom debts he knew absolutely nothing about. The liquid cash was entirely gone, vanished into thin air. "I was completely, irrevocably ruined. Unless... the barn. He suddenly remembered Nathaniel's crazy, cryptic rantings about the foundation of the family. He remembered Penny's maddeningly smug, peaceful face when she actively chose that rotting pile of firewood over a multi-million-dollar mansion. She knew something. She had hidden the real money. Bradley grabbed a heavy steel tire iron from the trunk of his Mercedes and sprinted desperately across the overgrown, muddy fields toward the Northfield barn. He was panting violently, his bespoke tailored suit soaked with cold sweat by the time he reached the heavy, grey sliding doors. They were slightly ajar. He burst inside, the heavy tire iron raised high, fully prepared to threaten, bribe, or physically beat the truth out of his isolated niece. "Penny!" he screamed into the dusty, suffocating darkness. "Where is it? What did that senile old fool give you? Tell me." "He gave me the absolute truth, Bradley." Penny's voice echoed calmly from the very back of the massive barn. Bradley stumbled forward blindly, rounding the rusted old tractor, and stopped dead in his tracks. The entire back wall of the barn had been completely torn away. Brilliant, harsh fluorescent light poured out from a massive, open steel vault hidden within the concrete foundation. Inside the brightly lit bunker, sitting perfectly calmly behind the mahogany desk, was Penny. Stacked neatly all around her, catching the light in a mesmerizing golden hue, were hundreds of gleaming bars of Swiss gold. Bradley dropped the tire iron. It hit the dirt floor with a dull thud. His eyes bulged with naked, overwhelming greed. "I knew it," he whispered feverishly, stepping slowly toward the open vault door. "I knew that vicious old bastard was hiding the real, liquid assets. Give it to me, Penny. Give it to me right now. $500,000, remember? I'll give you 2 million, 5 million. Just let me inside." "You have absolutely no power here, Uncle," Penny said, her voice dripping with absolute ice. "You don't own this acre of land. You don't own this physical structure. And you certainly don't own a single ounce of what's inside it." Bradley sneered, his financial desperation instantly turning into violent, murderous rage. "I'll kill you and take it all myself. Nobody knows you're out here in this rotting shed." He lunged forward aggressively, but before his foot could even cross the steel threshold of the vault, 2 heavy, imposing figures stepped out from the deep shadows beside the entrance. They were uniformed, heavily armed state police officers, their hands resting firmly on their holstered weapons. Behind them walked Detective Miller, a seasoned, unsmiling investigator from the Major Crimes Division. Bradley froze instantly, the remaining color violently draining from his face. "What is this?" "Bradley Henderson," Detective Miller stated firmly, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his leather belt. "You are officially under arrest for the premeditated murder of William Henderson, as well as multiple federal counts of massive financial fraud and racketeering." "Murder?" Bradley choked out, frantically backing away from the officers. "You're all insane. William died in a tragic car crash. It was a horrible accident. You have no proof." Penny stood up gracefully, lifting a thick stack of freshly printed photographs and the original, damning mechanic's invoice. "Grandpa Nate kept all the receipts, Bradley. The mechanic flipped on you this morning after Detective Miller paid him a rather persuasive visit. He told them absolutely everything about the brake lines." Bradley stared blankly at the documents, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. The crushing realization of his total, inescapable defeat washed over him like a freezing tidal wave. I wasn't just completely bankrupt. He was going to spend the rest of his miserable life rotting in a maximum security federal penitentiary. As the officers aggressively slammed the cold cuffs onto his wrists and dragged him, kicking and screaming, out of the barn, Bradley shrieked, thrashing wildly against their grip. The desperate echoes of his furious wails faded slowly into the crisp autumn wind, leaving only the quiet, steady hum of the vault's climate control system. Penny walked slowly to the entrance of her fortified bunker and looked out over the sprawling, debt-ridden estate her uncle had fought so ruthlessly and illegally to steal. The once mighty Henderson Manor was now just a hollow, empty shell, soon to be sold off in meaningless pieces to the highest corporate bidder. She turned back to the glowing gold, the true legacy her grandfather had left her, beautifully built on a bedrock of justice and ultimate retribution. The foundation was finally secure. Did this twisted tale of family betrayal, hidden fortunes, and sweet justice keep you on the edge of your seat? Sometimes the most valuable treasures are buried under years of dirt, just waiting for the right person to unearth them. If you loved this story of Penny's ultimate revenge, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends who love a great mystery, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories today.